So at to start, I pitched this because Godot, I've noticed, has been like, the show that everyone kind of relates to in one way or another, whether or not they're into theater. And I thought it was so interesting because like I studied theater in college, and my mom's connection to me was, well, I had to memorize Lucky's monologue when I was in school. And like she is not a theater person. Like that was just like hers. And then my brother has a similar thing. And so as somebody who, every night you get on that stage and you do Lucky's monologue, I wanted to start by asking you, has there been kind of those stories or those moments while you've been doing Godot that have people like kind of, captivated or making reactions to that monologue because of that connection?
Well, first of all, what kind of sadist would make your mother memorize Lucky's monologue? I mean, that's just cruel. I don't know. It's the other night I was about to launch into it and someone in the front row whispered very loudly, this is it. This is the famous speech. I was like, great. Thanks so much. Really needed that on top of everything. I don't know. I'm a pretty superstitious cat. Like I I block out like anything people are writing about me or reviews or stuff like that. But what has been meaningful is in the doing stage door and meeting some like younger actors who are just like that, just saying very complimentary things about the monologue and what it means to them. And my goal has always been with that to treat it as not absurdist and to just borrow something from Shakespeare where it's okay if you don't apprehend the intellectual argument of it. I'm not really interested in that. What I'm more interested in is some transference of emotion and the unconscious being at play so that that it's kind of superlingual, hopefully is the trick. And I can't see the audience when I'm out there. I have a very bright, blinding light in my face.
Yeah.
But I can feel them with me. And I've done a few one-person shows, and you can tell when you're all together breathing as a collective, and it does feel pretty sacred in there.
When I do love that Lucky is both tragic and a comedic relief in a show like Gato. But in this particular production, it is very interesting to see how you guys use humor with Lucky because, like, obviously people are like, "Oh, Bill and Ted's are gonna be the funny ones," and then like they tend to have the more serious, like, nice moments together, and Lucky gets to be the I'm gonna have a tongue in cheek moment with the audience kind of guy. How was that going through the process of figuring out how all these characters are going to interact in this Jamie Lloyd production and seeing how it has evolved every night on stage?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I trusted that Keanu and Alex would bring to the project their decades of friendship, and so that we'd have the bases covered on that. I think later in the game we realized we were missing a bit of the malevolence and violence and cruelty that is a necessary flavor in a Beckett world. So then that colored our relationship with Lucky and Patso and how Lucky's treated. But during my research, I read this quote from Beckett. Someone asked him, "Why'd you call him lucky?" And he says, "I think he's lucky because he has no expectations." And that can be, you can go a few avenues down that road. Like you can think that that's depressing, or to me, it was actually quite freeing. And I thought, well, if I have no expectations, then all the rules are sort of out the window, which means like I can see the audience.
Mm.
Like I can actually know what the rules are in this tunnel, and I can have information that they don't. Um, and so that sort of popped him out into this clown audience whisperer character. And I think Brandon, who plays Potts, and I were always interested early on that the power dynamics weren't so static and binary, that they shifted and there was a codependency among these two characters and that they were each other's caretaker in a way. Um, and so, a lot of my gestures are based off of what Brandon's doing. I'm shadowing him really, like we're moving as one organism, as one unit. But some of these things are it's just instinct and you feel them out in the rehearsal room of what am I feeling right now and who do I want to connect with? Some of it's staging. You know, I'm not in the eye line directly as some of the folks on stage. So, there was a moment in rehearsal when, about three of them were upstage while Vladimir's taking a leak. And I was like, well, if I'm downstage center with 900 people looking at me, I'm just gonna acknowledge that like we're all here together, which is like my favorite part of the play, actually, that Lucky does. So it's trial by error and it's listening and seeing how you can be helpful.
Yeah, well, it also is engaging because I was in the fourth row when I went and I was like, I guess we should all wave. Like we were like sitting there like, should we engage back? Like I don't know what the rule is with this show.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I wanted to ask about the staging because you brought it up because it is, I do love that this, because it is like the skate park and it's like the round thing. But I love that, like, it is so cool how they did it where you are actually one of the more stationary characters while all of these men are literally flopping on this stage at certain points. And like, I was
yeah.
like, someone's gonna break a leg because they're just like flopping their bodies on the thing. How was it, figuring out both how you function in a space like that and how everyone was going to go around you? Because it does paint beautiful pictures when they're all kind of sliding around and laying on the ground, and Lucky ends up being kind of the tallest one of the scene.
Yeah, in a world of tunnels, one could argue the wheelchair user does the best with that kind of architecture because you got to slalom yourself around the world. They were great. Jamie Lloyd Company, like they brought me in really early to have conversations about like, okay, this is what we're thinking about the set. And after I picked my jaw up off the floor, then the possibilities were more exciting than what the potential challenges would be. And we tried a couple things. I mean, they were very transparent of what the angle of the rake was going to be. And then at one point, I was like, I think that's going to be a little. After 100 performances, my shoulders are going to be screaming of pushing upstage. So they gently lowered the rake, the incline, so that it's very easy for me to kind of spin around and do my moves. And then like rehearsal was just fucking around, like just playing on it because I mean, Beckett says the play has to take place on an empty stage, and you could be a little cheeky, but I do honestly believe this. It is an empty stage. It's just rolled up,
Mm-hmm.
because the way it's treated, it looks like a rehearsal room floor, or a skate park to your point, Um, and I use this apparatus to get around town. I don't know if you can see it behind me. Probably, I'm not going to raise my camera. Um, It's a motorcycle attachment that goes to the front of my wheelchair that offloads my front two wheels and turns my manual wheelchair into like a battery operated trike that goes 20 miles an hour through the streets of Manhattan. So
Oh,
we tried that on the half pipe in rehearsal. And we did that, I think, for a day or two. And that was fun, but I was like, this is going to be too tricky. The battery runs out. There's a delay on hitting the gas. So we really just fucked around and played with it as this exciting piece of architecture, and then whatever that emotional vocabulary was, that was different in the rehearsal room because when we went into the theater, there was a top on it now.
mm.
So having this sense of sort of confinement around your periphery, at least in rehearsal, it was open above us. And then when you put the cap on it, it was a very different experience. So it's I don't think I've ever had a set be as emotionally evocative as this one. And I mean, it's so like um trite to say like the set itself was another scene partner, but it really feels like that. It feels like an organism.
Yeah, but when you mentioned Jamie Lloyd Company, which you've worked with before in A Doll's House, but what I loved about this is, as you said, Beckett says it's a blank stage, but every production of Godot I've ever seen is like, here's a tree, there's a tree in the background. And I like that this was like, no, we're going to keep it kind of like, we're going to have fun with it, but there's not going to be some tree you're staring at the entire
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
When you, obviously you were brought in earlier to figure out like Lucky and the staging and things like that, but when you hear, yeah, we're not doing the tree, or like in A Doll's House where it's like, yeah, Jessica Chastain's gonna be sitting on a chair spinning in the beginning. What is your first kind of reaction to somebody who, understands art and understands what these playwrights intentions were versus like what trusting what Jamie's kind of doing.
Well, I've worked with tour directors before, and you can smell it a mile away when these choices come from a place of ego and disrespectful disruption, as opposed to when they come from a place of um, reverence for a core truth of the material that simply bounces up against them in a fresh way, creatively. And Jamie, I always trust that he is in sync with something deeply personal about the material, but and respects it to the level that he can strip it down to the studs to to showcase it even more. Um, and I think it speaks to a generosity of spirit and also a real love for the audience, because to say that essentially that every audience member composes the tree
Mm.
is a beautiful theatrical statement, as opposed like, let's put another dumb fucking tiny ass Charlie Brown fucking tree. Like we've seen it a million times. Like what are we trying to iterate here? Like it seems like we're doing like a checklist. Like, did we do the Beckett right? And we all, I think, in rehearsal, the actors, I think we all felt a conscious um, kind of shuffling off of the ghosts of actors who played these parts, or how you ought to play these parts, or that Lucky's speech is usually a tempo and volume parlor trick. And I had no interest in that, at all. And so once Jamie and Suture kind of reveal their way into it from set and costume, then it sort of um, bulldozes the path ahead of us to find some alternative approaches to telling the story that are that are true to us and in complete synchronicity with what I would argue Beckett intended in the first place.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you too, because I can see it behind you. Mine's out in a hallway, but I have my Macbeth poster, and I was like, I can
Ah,
say it. We're not in a theater, but I have it down in my hallway because that's one of my favorite Shakespeare's, and it's one that like I think people often either they don't do it correctly. And what I loved about that production was I was like, yes, it is a man being manipulated by his wife, and she is not a villain. She is just using him to her advantage, and that production did it very well.
yeah.
And much like Beckett's work and A Doll's House and all of these things, people look at them at face value and lose a lot of it, especially if they're not theater people. For you, as someone who all three of those have been like helping audiences understand these pieces of like classic literature that people often misunderstand, what for you is the joy of getting to kind of be that guiding light for an audience to be like, hey, you think you know this, but actually you've been wrong for years.
No, well, I don't know if they've been wrong for years, but I mean, the joy of it, I feel, no pun intended, very lucky that for whatever reason, from Macbeth a little bit into Doll's House, and then I would argue probably with this one, that I'm sort of the audience's eye or ear or portal into the world. And I love public address. I've done one person shows. I've done a lot of monologues to audiences in Shakespeare plays. Othello and Richard III. I love connecting with the audience. I've never quite gotten over the fact that out of all the things someone can do with their time and their scarce finances, that they're going to sit in a seat in the dark and see something that I'm in is still kind of baffling to me. And so that gift of their time and attention, I think about it every day on my way to work, and it really turns me on creatively. And I also think part of it is coming from a working class neighborhood in Chicago where like there wasn't any artistic venues or outlets. Like you had to go downtown for that shit. And so to take these things that have been sort of existing behind a gated community, and to democratize them, to make Shakespeare or to make Beckett sound colloquial, to sound in some ways like someone having a rant in a bar after one too many beers. That to me is far more interesting, because the net gain on that is, you, as to your point, is you turn on an entire new audience to these classics, and you revive these classics so that they feel fresh and contemporary for an audience that doesn't need to see the 500th version of a production that looks exactly the same with the gowns and the swords.
Mhm.
So I don't know what my good fortune is in that I've sort of landed three shows in a row that have been lovingly disruptive of the expectations of these classics, but I wouldn't have wanted to be in any other productions of them.
Yeah, because I do love that the language doesn't change, but you can understand the intent differently in all of them. Because it's like, yeah, obviously we have, she's all that, or not she's all that, she's the man, and like anyone
Mm,
but you and 10 things I hate about you, where they're like making it as modern as physically possible so people understand the
right.
Shakespeare in question. But like all three of those productions, not a word is changed, but you still understand. Well, there are some words changing Godot, but it's not like crazy. Um, which brings me to my next question. Obviously, there are little jokes and nods to both Keanu and Alex's friendship with each other in the show. Like, I think Alex says something about like being friends for 20 years instead of whatever it was written. And then there's obviously the reference to Wild Stallions doing the guitars. You said you guys fucked around on set and were figuring out this staging and stuff. Did some of that stuff all come organically from everyone just kind of working together and figuring out how these characters would interact in those moments?
I think so. The first one you referenced, for instance, I don't know if that is a textual change because unless I'm completely having a blank out moment right now, we all dorked out about the different versions of the play.
Mhm.
Like the boys went to, I think it was Leeds, is that where they went, or Reading? There was like a Beckett Institute in Reading, and Jamie and Keanu and Alex went there and met with, was it James Knowles? Who wrote the fucking book? I have it over there. James Knowlson? Yeah, James Knowlson. No, come on, monkey. James. No, wrong glasses for that. He wrote Damn the Fame, whatever his name
Okay.
is. But they met with him, and my point is that they got to see different drafts before the 54 Grove printing. And then in Lucky's speech, this is nuts. Uh, Towards the end, right before he sent the final thing to Grove, he did a series of like three little changes that all had to do with making it more Irish, actually. So when I started working on the Lucky speech, I did it in an Irish dialect, um, and did that for a couple weeks, and then that kind of washed out, and some of the cadence is still there in places. But like the skull, the skull, the skull, the skull in Connemara, in his draft is the skull, the skull, the skull, the skull in Alabama.
Like, all right, Beckett.
What? And then he added camogie, which is an Irish sport. And then there are two other to dwindle. He added as opposed to fade away. So there just was these kind of like little Irishisms, but which is all to say that I don't think anything is added from us that wasn't in a draft that Beckett was playing with.
That's so
Yeah. Yeah, it was real, it was like nerd paradise, you know.
well, and I want to get a little nerdy about acting because it's like in college I had to do a nonsense monologue from Middletown. And I was like, it was just words. And I was like, and my teacher was like, okay, you have to break it down. And like I had to like figure out intentions to help me memorize it. So I wanted to ask you, what is your kind of approach and outlook on like these nonsense monologues and figuring out like what all these intentions are so then it's not nonsense when you're saying them, even if an audience member is like what's going on here, this is just a bunch of words.
Was the monologue from Middletown the mechanics monologue? Are you talking
No,
about what?
it was the public speakers, I think is the name,
Oh yeah,
the first one where it's just like
sure,
a
sure.
to b a to b a to b, and I'm like, I gotta figure
Yeah.
out what is over there now.
I did that play at Steppenwolf.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Yeah, we
Yeah,
did it my junior year in college.
Willino's a buddy of mine, and Willino, I think, is definitely an heir apparent to the world of Beckett.
Hmm.
Um, whether it's nonsensical or sensical enough, like a lot of Shakespeare passages where you're like, okay, but there's these seven words that no one is going to get. Um, you have to be as specific as possible in terms of the images in your mind and in the kind of feelings in my heart. And then from a technical point of view, you know, so what I do is I'll take the speech and I break it up into three acts.
Mm.
And then not according to what the playwright has written or where the beat changes are. It's kind of like where I feel like this feels like we're in a different world, or this feels like the shift. I'll break it up into three acts, and I'll highlight the third act in one color first, and then break that text down, and I'll work on the third act first, the end of the speech. I'll get that cold, then I'll ignore it. I'll put my focus on act two, highlight that in a different color, break that down, look at the punctuation, da 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 da. Once act two is cold, run two and three, two and three, two and three. Then I end at the beginning, highlight that in a different color, get that cold, break it down, and then one, two, three, one, two, three, one, two, three. The idea behind it is that, I've watched hundreds of auditions over my life as a director and former artistic director. Actors are always great out of the gate for the first 10, 15 seconds because that's the part we spent the most amount of time on because you keep fucking up and starting over again. And then as I started doing longer speeches and then one person shows, a Willino one person show, which was exquisitely lonely, um, it's like, why not be kinder to yourself? So with this method, every second that passes on stage, you're actually traveling into more and more familiar territory because you're swimming towards what you started with.
That's awesome. Oh, I love that. That makes sense because you're right. Everyone is like, well, I'm going to memorize these first two lines and go from there. And
Right.
that's what they know.
Yeah, and then also why not begin at the end to see how the character changes? Um, and if it's good writing, like Samuel Beckett, um, then they're doing this absurdism for a reason, and then well, what's the reason? And you have to trust that it's never just a masturbatory parlor trick, that there's something deeply humane behind it. And that in the case of Lucky, that like this is just how he talks now. Like he's gone through so much shit and has seen so much in the world, has read all the books, has done all the lectures. That like this is his final lecture. And I beg your pardon. I think he says everything he wants to say to the point that's why he doesn't speak at the end, you know.
Yeah, well,
He's done.
I wanted to ask about that. Is that also kind of, a moment of like, all right, well now I have other things I have to do, but I don't have to worry about speaking. Because I do love that Lucky's monologue is in act one, because then it means
Mhm.
all of act two, the person who is playing Lucky is like, I get to just do whatever I need to do and not say a word now. Is that fun to you that you're like, you get to have that kind of moment of, well, that's that for that performance. My Lucky's monologue is done and get to enjoy act two? Or do you also wish there was like a little bit more of Lucky in act two?
Well, I'm not entirely convinced that who we see in Act Two is Lucky.
Mm.
Um, but to your question, yeah, it's amazing to climb Mount Everest in Act One, and then at intermission be like, fantastic. Let me now I can eat because I'm not nervous anymore. I can have my bowl of chili that I brought. I can play chess on my phone backstage before I go out. And be this kind of loving presence for Patso. Um, but no, I'm very I like the way it's structured. Indeed, I wish I would not like to be waiting an hour and a half to do that speech. It's nice to get it out before intermission is over.
Just be like, and now I'm done.
Yeah, yeah, and I think he like it's almost like watching a car, in these like drag race, in these cars that are built to go like down the single track 200 miles an hour. It's like they blow up sometimes. And it's like
Mm.
I think he just blows every cylinder, every piston in the engine with that speech. to the point that he loses. I mean, the last those last moments, I think, are some sort of interpretation of what it's like to lose coherence and your faculties of cognition and speech.
Yeah. For our last question, I wanted to ask you because you obviously, I know what costuming means to an actor and figuring out what they're going to look like in this. And the mask that Lucky has on says a lot because not only is his name Lucky, but he literally looks like he's wearing one of the horse kind of like blinder masks. And I was
Oh,
like, well, they're really making him kind of feel like a horse in this one. But for you, when you're given that and they're like, this is what you come on stage looking like before, Lucky is revealed and can have his moment, how much does that tell you both about the vision that the whole production has before you get to see it staged, and also what your Lucky's kind of role in this production of Godot is?
that was a very late addition to our
Oh
process. That was introduced our penultimate tech rehearsal.
my God.
Um, so there was an entire emotional negotiation with this mask because as an actor, you're like, oh, well, obviously everything I'm doing has sucked so bad that literally they're just like, you're done. We just want to cover you up, And of course, that's not it. What the intention was we were missing the malevolence, and the violence of Beckett's worlds. Um, so I spent time with it. I journaled about it, talked to a therapist about it. And once you kind of get over those stupid little actor egoic things, you're like, okay, well, what's the hidden opportunity here? And for me, the hidden opportunity was this guy's mind and oration, his faculties are so powerful
Mm,
and formidable that he needs to be fucking
yeah.
muted with this piece of architecture. Um, and the rules around, when he's unstrapped and strapped, Patso's logic is not consistent because, he talks about how I go on and on and on. Well, at any time they can just throw it on and,
Mm,
and mute him. But so there's something about Lucky's oration that Pato does love and need, even though it's painful. So it felt like this thing of like, sure, I'll look like a prisoner for you if that makes your day easier,
mm.
as opposed to like, oh, my life sucks and I have to wear this demoralizing thing in this bleak apocalyptic landscape. So I absolutely love it. I've never had as an actor that profound of an emotional response to something introduced from my character. Um, I suspect if it was introduced earlier on, it would have been a little bit different, but this is all trial by error. You don't know what something needs until you know what it needs. And now I love it. I love putting it on. I love having it taken off. Um, and I love the waiting inside of it.
Well, it did help me in a lot of ways be like, oh yeah, Lucky is actually so intelligent that they're like, we have to shut him up. And because most of the time I was like, sure, he's saying a nonsense monologue and you're telling me he's like the most intelligent man you've ever met. And this time I was like, he is. You're so true. Lucky's the smartest human I've ever seen. But I loved this production. It was so funny. I brought my friend and she was like, I think I've know Keanu Reeves's feet more than I know like things in my life because we were just staring at him for 2 hours. But
He has beautiful feet.
he does have beautiful feet. But
They're
thank you for
beautiful.
talking with me. I truly, truly love all of the productions I've seen you in, and I think Gato is something very special. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your interest.
Of course. Have a great one.
All right, you too.
Bye.